welcome to Our Changing State, the podcast. I'm Matthew Petty, host of Florida Matters on WUSF 89.7. For this podcast, we're taking a deep dive into topics that seem to be changing by the minute, from the environment and the economy to our politics and culture. For decades, people have been drawn to Florida by the warm weather, the beaches, theme parks, and lack of state income tax. But in the past few years, Florida's booming population has shifted those changes into overdrive. Our reporting for this podcast included an online survey where we asked people like you to share your take on this state we call home. Well, that's right, you and your neighbours drive the conversation we're having with residents and topic experts. Thanks for being here. We hope that we all learn a little more about our changing state in the process. Today we're talking about housing. Florida is the fastest growing state in the United States, according to the US Census Bureau. More than 22 million people now call the state home. Since 2010, Florida's added an average of 287,000 more residents a year, and many of them have arrived in just the past few years. All that can make finding somewhere to live challenging. We start with Tampa residents Charles George and Carolyn Lang. They needed to make a move, but the timing was right at the height of a real estate frenzy that's still playing out in the Tampa Bay region. WUSF's Craig Cobb visited them at their new home to hear how they tried to find the right home at the right price in the right place.
Hi there. Hi.
Just randomly, come on in.
Okay, Craig Cobb.
Charles.
Charles.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And you are?
Carolyn.
Carolyn, nice to meet you. This is a great neighborhood. I am
Yes.
not familiar with this neighborhood.
Well, it's called Ravinia. Do you need a tour?
Yeah, a tour would be really cool.
Oh,
Can we
okay.
do that?
Yeah, I can
Let's
do
do that. All right, so Ravinia,
Ravinia.
and you moved from?
Brandon area, by the Brandon Mall.
This is great. So this is kind of an open floor plan here.
Yeah, on our island with the
Yes,
sink.
your island. It's
Yes.
great. It's great.
Yeah, it all works well for us. I'm an accountant. I work for a small company in St. Petersburg.
And what do you do?
I teach math, science, and technology classes.
And you've been in Florida for?
20 plus years.
And you?
Since birth, so 51 and a half years ago.
All of that time in Tampa, or?
No, I was born in Alachua, Florida, and then Sarasota, and then Tallahassee, and now Tampa. The pantry is amazing. You can see everything. The shelves are the perfect depth to really just have one layer of things.
We do have our hurricane supplies laid in, so we're ready. We were living in a condominium, a nice condominium, but it was second floor. And Carolyn was having some health issues, and so we decided to look for some place that was first floor. And that was what started the search. This is a yoga swing.
I was going to
It's
ask,
an exercise device that my wife uses.
what were the frustrations?
From my point of view, there were several. One is we looked, yes, we have a good realtor, but we look online like people do today. And what we found was a very unevenness in the market as to quality. So what might be a $250,000 house in one area could look vastly different than the same price in another not far away area. And I think working through all those challenges was part of our biggest thing.
Same thing for you, Carolyn?
That and I would say misleading photographs that may have been taken, I don't know, decades before. Two-car garage.
You're far too organized.
We've worked very hard at this. When we started hitting some of these quality issues and seeing what we got for, say, $250, which was kind of our first peg price, it was like we almost have to go up. We couldn't find the kind of house that we wanted, so we ended up in the mid 300s before we were done. So we spent more than we expected, but we got what we wanted.
The houses that we could have gotten for $250,000 would have needed $100,000 to $200,000 of renovation to make them livable. So we would have spent the same amount of money, but we would have had to deal with construction and all the hassle.
The master bath.
The master bath with the most awesome shower ever. What happens is that over time, the good properties have already been picked off. And what we're being left with is houses. They're serviceable, but if you really want a livable house, you're going to have to put money in it over and above the high price you already paid. That gets tough.
So sitting here now, I'm assuming that you're pretty happy you found what you found.
I consider ourselves very fortunate. There are not a lot of properties, I think, that would meet our criteria.
It came out, on a Monday? We saw it on Tuesday and had an offer in almost immediately. And it didn't go to the weekend for people to come see it. So we didn't have a bidding war. We didn't have, But if it had gone further, we would have.
The time interval for decision making is very, very short. And you're making one of your major life decisions here, financially speaking. So that's hard.
If you'd like to hear an extended version of each episode of Our Changing State, or if you'd like to listen to archived episodes of our weekly show, Florida Matters, visit our website, wusfnews.org. Recently, a population boom and politics is raising our profile, and we've been talking about what that means with our neighbours across the Tampa Bay region. Today, your questions are focusing on housing. Well, joining us to talk more about the impact of Florida's surging population on housing, from the high price of home ownership to the demand for rental housing, Florida Atlantic University business professor, associate dean, and real estate expert Ken H. Johnson. Ken, thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
And Florida Housing Coalition CEO Ashawn Nesbitt. Ashawn, thanks to you as well.
Thank you very much for being here.
Mary Beth Koch from Tampa asked, how do housing costs look compared to the rest of the country? Ken, what about that?
Sure. So housing in Florida, both to own and to rent in, are at record highs for this part of the country. This is a lot different than we were looking at 15 years ago. Rents are high, home prices are high, but this time around rents are supporting home prices. So we're not expecting a crash, but we're probably talking about a prolonged period of unaffordable housing.
So for folks who are looking to get in on the housing market, that's not necessarily great news.
It's tough. We actually have a history of this around the country too. In particular, I guess the closest example would be Miami circa 86 through a roughly 90, where prices went flat for 3, 4, or 5 years as the trend of housing prices caught up with actual prices.
Jay Clausen from Venice wanted to know, is housing really unaffordable to the majority of current residents, or is this a supply issue? Sean, what do you think?
Yes, it's kind of a two-part question. When you think about what's going on in our housing markets, and a lot of it is driven by the population growth and folks coming into our state from other parts of the country who are, have a different set of market parameters that they're working with. For example, those coming from the Northeast to Florida may see our prices as relatively affordable. So you do have that. Compare that to our existing workforce that's been here. A lot of it for a long period of time has been kind of in the lower income, in the tourist industry, the service industry. And so you have a housing market that's driven in large part by folks coming in from other parts of the country with higher incomes or higher assets that are now competing with the lower income workforce.
Let's hear a question from Margaret Stahl from Tampa. She wrote in, Tampa housing has become way too expensive and is non-existent for working citizens. I can't afford to live in a 3-bedroom as a single parent with 2 teenage boys. I have an education and a great job, but the cost of living is horrible. The housing assistance is inundated with, and wait lists for affordable living are closed. Sean, I wonder about the assistance that's out there. What can you tell us about that?
There is sources out there, but it's very hard to get at this moment kind of the traditional forms of assistance. If you think about rental assistance, is very difficult, long wait lists. The time that it takes to produce housing, for example, through the low-income housing tax credit program, which is the biggest producer of rental housing for our workforce, it takes years sometimes to produce that housing. And so, that's really kind of created a situation where is difficult to access those resources that are available. And, we have a stock that's been kind of what we call the naturally occurring, kind of the mom and pops that rents housing that's, naturally affordable without subsidies, for example. And those folks are, exiting the market after the pandemic and selling out because, it makes sense for them from an investment standpoint. And so, those things are causing rents to go up where, stock was previously affordable, is now unaffordable. And so you kind of got all of that happening at once. That's really creating a dire need.
For those Floridians who have been able to buy a home in the last few years, it can be a nerve-wracking process. Let's take a listen to 29-year-old St. Petersburg resident Haley Bush.
I feel like so lucky I was able to buy a house when I did. I feel like, a month later, I wouldn't have been able to afford to live in my state, my home state. And I think there are many, many other Floridians my age and older, frankly, who are in the same boat.
Ken, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what's happening with housing supply in Florida at the moment.
So it's pretty clear that the influx of population is bigger than at any time in recent memory. So not surprised to find large numbers in terms of a premium that you would be paying for housing in most of the larger metros in the state of Florida. Tampa right now is the third most overpriced city or metro area, if you will, in the country when we measure where prices are compared to where they should be based on the history of prices, coming in at a premium of roughly 42.4%. Most of the Florida cities are all on this top premium list, and that's reflective of how many people are moving in. It's the people that are moving here now. They're not the same folks that we used to see. We don't see the retirees or people coming here looking for jobs. A lot of these folks are coming in, bringing work with them, bringing industry and business with them. But that is, in the short run, more than a little bit of a kerfuffle, if you will, for those of us that have already lived here, because our incomes are much lower. Our incomes are rising, but they're not rising as fast as housing costs are. On the supply side, the big problem right now going on is we're just not building enough, and you have to look at the reasons why that is. And one of the primary reasons that gets very little attention is the fact that after the last housing crash, so many developers exited the market, not only in Florida, but around the country. Another issue besides just the sheer number of builders or the number of hammers that we can sling in Florida is the fact that there's this concept of NIMBYism that's seemingly pervasive around the state and many parts of the country. And that's basically the concept of not in my backyard. And for some reason, there's this belief or opinion that says having a rental unit near my home doesn't help the value, or having renters near my home doesn't help the value. And there's no academic support for that. And lastly, the issue of short-term rentals is not helping. Every unit that's taken out of inventory to be put into inventory as a short-term rental is a roof that we don't have to live under and rent or live under and own, and that only exacerbates the problem.
Dave Coleman from Tampa asks, do local governments have the ability to make laws and zoning changes that would help workforce families? Sean, what about that?
Absolutely, they do through land use and zoning have the ability to incentivize the development of housing that's affordable to the local workforce, and that's something that is long been a part of the regime, even supported at the state level for local governments to do that. And so, we've had very recent legislation to give local governments even more tools to provide or incentivize the development of affordable housing, where it makes sense, because land is running out, particularly along our existing coastal areas. I mean, there's still plenty of coastal area where people want to live, But, in our metro areas, definitely we're going to get more dense. And so where do we want to focus that? Focusing that on areas where it does make sense to put it, along our commercial corridors, along areas that have access to transit. So we're both, creating good affordable housing that has access to opportunity and kind of lessening the impacts at the edges of our metropolitan areas for sure. And local governments do have quite a bit of tools that they can access or, put into place to encourage housing development that's affordable.
As you can see, residents in the greater Tampa Bay area have a lot of questions and opinions about housing. For example, we had lots of comments about homeowners insurance. Let's listen to Sharon Tagle, who's retired and who moved to Tampa in 2009.
My biggest concern right now is my property insurance. It's gone up $1,200 in the last year, and it's scheduled to go up again. It's going to almost be as high as my mortgage pretty soon, and that's a care. We're looking into moving out of here, and we don't want to.
Ken, how big a factor is the cost of homeowners insurance in Florida's housing market?
In the most recent months, this has become more and more an issue. It seems like so much of what we talk about today is going to be, well, there's solutions on the horizon. They're just not going to happen in the next few months. And this is probably true for homeowners insurance as well. A couple of pieces of legislation has gone through that will help. Number one, doing away with the one-way attorney fees where basically the loser has to pay all of the attorney fees. Assignment of benefits has also been done away with, where a third party can step in and act for the homeowner in negotiating things like new roofs. And so I know the litigation cost in the last few years, pretty much out of every dollar spent out in the last couple of years by insurers in the state, have been 75% for each dollar, 75 cents on each dollar goes to litigation and public adjuster cost, and 25% actually goes to pay claims. So that should start to go down, but you have to understand that there are a number of issues and claims and cases that are in the pipeline that's going to take some amount of time to work through. So unlike rents and home prices, I do expect homeowners insurance costs to come down. We're paying roughly threefold the average homeowners insurance is costing in the U.S., and that's not all explained by hurricane exposure.
Just to wrap up here, I want to ask you if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention at this point in time.
Housing, both for ownership and rent, goes in a cycle. And we're currently at the peak of a housing cycle for both rents and home ownership. One of the things that's absolutely true when you're at the peak of the cycle is it's incredibly difficult to solve the problem at that point in time for affordability issues. Land is at its most expensive, material and labor are at their most expensive. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do something. It's going to probably take some time to come into effect. This isn't the first time this has happened. It isn't the first time it's happened in Florida. It isn't the first time it's happened around the country. Historically, after World War II, people left rural areas and moved into metropolitan areas. And so much of what we're seeing today is exactly what has happened before. It takes time to build units. But once those units get built, you'll see things come back in line. But until then, it's going to be a pretty rough road to hoe. And we're going to see some issues in terms of density. As our density will increase, we're going to see more people living in one unit on average, multifamily generational living, where that's kind of gone out of vogue. But you're going to see that grandchildren to grandparents, you're going to see these odd couples, if you will. I'm kind of showing my age back to a 60s and 70s sitcom. The Odd Couple and the Golden Girls, those came from real life situations. But we will work our way through this. I'm not willing to give up on the state of Florida by any stretch of the imagination. I think things are going to get better way before they get worse, and I have no plans to move.
We've been speaking with Florida Atlantic University business professor, associate dean, and real estate expert Ken H. Johnson. Ken, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Florida Housing Coalition CEO, Ashawn Nesbitt. Ashawn, thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Our Changing State. Find more details about this series from WUSF Public Media, including photos of the people we're meeting across the Tampa Bay region, on our website, wusfnews.org. Find us on Facebook and Twitter. You can also stream our weekly show Florida Matters every Tuesday at wusfnews.org. Our producer is Denora Prevost. The reporter for this episode is Craig Kopp. Our podcast producer is Scott Wachtler. We also received support for this week's episode from engineer Jackson Harp, digital editor Carl Lishandrello, and news director Mary Shedden. I'm Matthew Petty. Thanks for listening.